In this final video of 6, we're going to finish creating our gorgeous Instagram clone, Quasargram, using vue.js, Quasar, Firebase, node.js, and Express. And in this video, we're going to work on our Create Post Endpoint, which will be used by our camera page to create a new post. We're going to set up an environment variable so that we can easily switch between our production API and our local API. Then we're going to work on our Create Post Endpoint. We're going to send the form data from our camera page to this endpoint and pass it with a library called busboy. Then we're going to upload our photo to Firebase Storage and create a new post in the database. We'll also add some form validation to this page, such as disabling this capture button once an image has been captured. We'll add some error handling and we'll add a nice loading state for when we create a new post. And we'll finish up by building our app for production and deploying it to Firebase hosting and deploying our backend to Heroku. And then we'll make sure it's working on a desktop browser and on mobile as well. And if you missed the previous videos in this series, check the links in the description. If you're new here, my name's Danny. I'm an indie app developer and creator of Fudget. If you want to learn how to create cross-platform apps and web apps using technologies like vue.js, Quasar, and Firebase, click subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss anything. Let's add a new Create Post endpoint to our backend. Okay, so now I'm going to get my backend running. So I'm going to cd into backend and just run npm start. Just make sure that's working. Yeah, seems to be grabbing the posts. So now let's create a new endpoint. So I'm going to go into backend and open index.js. And I'm just going to duplicate this posts endpoint and this comment. And I'm just going to change this label to endpoint-create post. And the URL is going to be /create post. And I'm going to remove everything inside this apart from the response.set, because we do need to keep that in all of our endpoints so that wherever our front end is, our front end will have permission to access these endpoints. So I'll get rid of everything else. And for now, we'll just respond with a simple string. So I'll just add response.send, and then I'll just put create post in there. And I'll save that. And hopefully our backend will have been reloaded. So I'm just going to go to the backend, which is at localhost 3000, go to /create post. And yeah, so this new endpoint is working. When we send our post data to this create post endpoint, we're going to be using this same URL, localhost 3000, the same URL we're using on our homepage here to get to the posts endpoint. And at some point, we're going to want to switch this to our live API URL on Heroku. And so instead of having to go through all of our components, updating this URL one by one, every time we want to switch from the local API to the live API, it'd be better if we could store this URL, this base URL here, in one place so that we can easily switch back and forth. And we could do this with environment variables. So I'm just going to jump to the Quasar site and go to Quasar CLI and quasar.conf.js. And so we can add environment variables to our config file. So I'll just jump down to the environment variables example. And that's here, example setting env for dev/build. And you can see they're just adding this env object to the build object in the config file, and then adding a environment variable here. And in this example, they're making it automatically switch between the dev API and the production API based on whether the app is currently running in dev mode. But I don't want to do it like this because I want to be able to switch back and forth whenever I want, because sometimes we might want to use the live API even when we're running the dev version of our app. So I'm just going to jump to the config file and I'll search for build : and so we just need to add an env object, and we can add any variables we want in here. So I'm just going to add a variable called API, and for now I'll just set it to the base URL of our API, the local one. So I'm just going to copy this up to before the slash there and paste that in here. And I'll save that. And now we should be able to use this environment variable by just using process.env.api. So let's give this a try. I'm going to change these quotes here, single quotes, to backticks so we can interpolate this environment variable. Then I'm going to get rid of the URL up to 3000, and then we'll just interpolate this environment variable by adding process.env.api. And I'll save that, and let's see if our homepage is still working. Yeah, that still seems to be working. And now if we want to switch to our live API URL, all we need to do is jump to the config and change the URL here. And my live API URL is at https://quasargram-backend.heroku-app.com. And before we save that, we just need to deploy our latest backend. So I'll jump back to the terminal, the one that's running the backend, close that process and just run npm run deploy. And that's now finished deploying. And obviously you'll need to use your app URL here. Well, let's save this quasar.conf.js and see if the homepage is still working. And yeah, it's still working, except it's now using the live API URL. And we can confirm this by going to the network panel. And I'll just search for Heroku. If I hover over this post request, you can see the live URL there. So that's now working. And so that we don't have to memorize our local URL and our live URL, let's put them in some variables. So I'm going to jump to the top of quasar.conf.js and just set up some variables. So I'll call the first one API_local and just put our local URL in there, localhost 3000. And then I'll set up one for our production API called API_production and just paste in my live app URL there. Just grab that from below. So grab that from here. And now we can just use these variables instead down in the env section here. So I'll get rid of that and just put API production. And then I'll just add a little comment here to remind us what the options are. So the options are API local or API production. I'll save that. And that's still working. And for now, let's stick with the local API. So I'm going to change this to API local and save that. We just need to get our local backend running again. So I'm just going to run npm start, get that running again. And the app's now using the local API. And now whenever we want to switch, all we need to do is change this one variable. Nice and easy. Let's send some post data from our camera page to this endpoint we've created. So if we go back to our app and go to the camera page, if we take a photo and enter a caption and enter the location, and now if we go to View DevTools and find this camera page component, which is here, and if we look in the data here and this post object, so we have everything we need here. We've got the ID, the caption, the date, the location, and the image file. So we just need to send all of this to our endpoint. So I'm going to jump to the camera page, page camera.view. So I'm going to add a click handler to this post image button. So I'll just search for that. And the button is here. So I'll add a click handler. which triggers a method called add post. And we'll create that method in our methods section. And I'm just going to collapse all these other methods. And add this method here. So add post. And for now, we'll just log out add post to make sure that click handler is working. So click the button, and yeah, that's firing okay. And because we're sending a file here, our image file, we need to send this as form data. So we need to create a new form data object, and then we can just append all of our fields and our file to that form data object, and then just send the form data object to our endpoint. So to create a new form data object, we can just do new form data, and we need to put this in a variable. So I'll just call that form data. And then to add a field to this form data object, we can just do form data.append. And then we want to pass in the name of the field. So let's do the ID field first. And then we want to pass in the data for that field. And that's going to be at post.id. So for the second parameter, we just want to do this.post.id. And then I'll just do the same for caption, location, and date. So I'll duplicate this 3 times and change this one to caption and this one to location and this one to date. And you need to make sure you change that both here and here. And to append our file, we need to do form data.append. And the first parameter needs to be file. And for this, we need to pass 2 more parameters. The first one is the file that we're going to send, and that will be stored in this post.photo property. So I'll pass that in, this .post.photo. And the third parameter is the file name that we want to use for this file. And so to make sure that file name is unique, we could just use our ID followed by .png. So for this name parameter, I'm just going to do this .post.id plus and then .png. So now this form data object is ready to be sent to our endpoint. So let's add a post request using Axios. So I'll just do this $axios.post this time. We want to pass in the URL. And remember, we can now just use our environment variable to spit out the base API URL. So I'll just copy that from here. We need to make sure we're using backticks here if we're interpolating variables. So I'll paste in the API URL, and our endpoint is at /create post. So I'll just put /create post at the end there. And the next parameter is the data we're going to send. So we're just going to send this form data object. So I'll pass that in, form data. And this will return a promise. So I'll add a then block with a response. And I'll just log out the response. And I'll also add a catch block for any errors. And we'll log out the error. So I'll save that. And I'll just jump back to the backend and back to this Create Post Endpoint. And this request object here should contain information about the request that was sent to this endpoint. So instead of sending this text back, I'm going to send request.headers to send the headers information from the request made by our camera page that will be sent to this endpoint. So I'll save that and I'll take a photo, enter a caption, enter a location, and click on post image. We have an error here, a network error, and I've just realized what's gone wrong here. This create post endpoint needs to be a post endpoint, not a get endpoint. So I'm just going to change the word get to post, and we'll save that. And I'll clear the console and try clicking post image again. Again, let's make sure we've taken a photo and filled in the fields. And we now have a response object. So if we go in there and we go to data and we look at content type, we can see that our endpoint has received some multi-part form data. So the endpoint is successfully receiving our form data. However, using just node.js and Express alone, it's very difficult for us to actually get to this form data and to the file, etc. So in order to access this form data on the back end and get access to all the fields and the file, we can use a node.js package called busboy. Let's use the busboy package to parse the form data that's being sent to this endpoint so that we can grab all of the field data to store in our database, and so that we can grab the image file to store in Firebase Storage. So I'm just going to Google busboy GitHub and jump to the GitHub page for busboy. And it says here, this is a Node.js module for parsing incoming HTML form data, which is what we're sending to this endpoint. So first of all, we need to install it to our backend. So I'll copy that command, shut down the server, and paste that command in, and I'll add --save to save this as a dependency. And we have an example of how to use it here. And so I'll just add the dependencies we need first. We don't need this HTTP package because we're not using it to create a server. We're using Express. But we might need this inspect package, and we definitely need the busboy package. So we'll pull in this inspect package in our dependencies section, and I'll just stick let before that. And then we need to pull in busboy as well. So we'll do that there. And I'll just put let instead of var for consistency. So I'm going to copy all of that and jump down to our endpoint, create post endpoint, and I'll paste that over our response.send. We still need to leave this response.set line in. So I'll paste that in there, and I'll explain what this is doing in a minute. But first, I'm just going to tidy this up. I'm going to add a few spaces just to make this a bit more legible. And in this example, they're using REQ and RES instead of request and response. So I'm just going to replace all occurrences of REQ with request. So there's one here and one down here. So I'll change that to request. And I'll change all occurrences of RES. I think it's just these two. Replace those with response. So what's going on here with this code? I'm just going to full screen this a second. So the first line is just creating a new busboy object based on the request headers that we're sending to this endpoint. And then we have this onFile hook. And this will be triggered for every file that's sent in the request to this endpoint. And you can see it has a console log here, which is spitting out information about the file, such as the file name and MIME type and stuff like that. And then we have this onData hook, which is fired when busboy has received the data for that file. Then we have this file onEnd hook, which is fired when busboy has finished grabbing all of the file data. Next, we have this onField hook, which will be fired for every field contained in our form data. And you can see it's logging out the field name and the value of each field. And we should be able to see these console logs in the terminal later on. And then finally, we have this finish hook, which is fired when busboy is completely finished parsing the form. So this is the point where we would do stuff like write to the database. And we'll do that in a little bit. And then this last line here, request.pipe busboy. This is basically just piping the request that we're sending to this endpoint into busboy. And now hopefully if I save this and try to create a post in our app, we should see all of these console logs being fired with information about our field names and information about our file as well. So let's save that and see if it works. And I'm just going to make sure the backend is running, which it's not right now. So I'll just run npm start. And I'll just move this back over to the left. And let's try and create a post. And we don't need to take another picture and fill this all in. We can just click post image. So let's try that. And we have an error here for some reason, even though it did seem to work, because we can see our fields being logged out. So we can see our ID field and the value, and then the caption and the value, location and the date. And we can see information about our file. So we can see the file name, the encoding, and the MIME type, image/PNG. So I don't know why we're getting this console.log error. And I think I see what's wrong here. In this finish hook, this line here, response.writehead 303, and then connection close and location slash. I think this is trying to redirect the API to the URL slash. And since we don't have an endpoint for the root, we've only got /posts and /create posts. I think this is causing an error. So I'll just comment that out and save that and see if we still get that error. So I'll clear the terminal, clear the console even, and click on post image. And yeah, we no longer get that error, but we are getting an empty data response here. And maybe that's because of this response.end. So maybe I'll just replace that with response.send, and I'll just put done parsing form and save that. And I'll click post image again. And yeah, now we're getting a response with this text field. So Busboy is now getting access to all of our field data, ID, caption, location, and date. And we'll worry about handling the image and uploading that later on. But for now, let's just see if we can take these fields and store them in a new post in our posts collection in our Firestore database. Let's store all of our field data that we're getting from this onField hook as a post in our posts collection in the database. So first we need an object that we can store all the fields in. So I'm going to create an object, and this needs to be outside of this field hook because this is going to be fired for every field that we're sending to this request. So I'll put that up here, and I'll just call it fields and set that to an empty object to begin with. And instead of logging out the field name and the value, we're just going to add each field name and value to that fields object. So I'll just do fields, square brackets, field name equals val. And I'll just get rid of this console log. And hopefully by the time we get to this onFinish hook here, this fields object should be fully populated with all of our fields. So let's try just logging that fields object out in this finish hook. So I'll log that out here, fields, and we'll save that. And I'll just clear the terminal, and let's try clicking on post image again. And if we look at the terminal, we can see we're logging out that fields object, and we can see our ID and our caption and our location and our date. So now that we have all of our field data, we can write this to our posts collection in our database. So I'm going to jump to the Firebase docs site at firebase.google.com/docs. Then I'll go to Cloud Firestore, and then add and manage data, then add data. So we have an example here telling us how to add a new document to our collection. So we just need to grab the collection and then fire this doc method, give it an ID, and then trigger this set method, where we can just pass in the data, the JavaScript object that we want to store in that document. So I'm just going to copy this line from the DB bit up to there, and we'll paste that in our finish hook, because this is where we need to do our writing to the database. So I'll paste this after this console.log. And so we want to grab the posts collection. So I'll change cities to posts. We need to give the document an ID. So I'm just going to use the ID from our post that we have in fields.id. So I'll just pass in fields.id there. And then we just trigger this set method and pass in the data we want to store there. So we could just pass in this fields object straight away, like this. But we're also going to need an image URL to add to this post as well, which we don't have in this fields object. So instead, I'm just going to specify all of the fields one by one. So we'll pass in an object here, and we'll just specify all of the fields we want to store there. So first of all, we need an ID field, and that's just going to be stored in fields.id. Then we need a caption field, which will be in fields.caption. And then I'll do the same for location, fields.location. And then the date field, fields.date. And we're also going to need an image URL. And we're not handling uploading the image yet. So for now, we'll just hard code in an image URL. So I'll just put the field name in, image URL. And we'll just hard code an image URL here. So we can grab one from our Firebase storage. So I'm going to jump to the Firebase console, jump to our project, and then storage. And we'll just grab the URL for this image that we have stored in there. So I'll click on this link and copy the URL from the address bar. And we'll just paste that in there for now. But later on, when we actually upload our image to Firebase storage, after we upload it, we'll be able to get the URL for that image and put that in here. But for now, we'll just hard code this one in. So I'm just going to get rid of these console logs as well. But we'll leave this response.send in there. And I'll save that. And let's see if we click on post image, if it actually adds the post to the database. So I'll click on post image. And we've had a successful response, which says done parsing form. So it looks like this has worked. And let's double check that in our database. So we'll jump back to the Firebase console and then database. And yeah, it looks like it's added our post here. You see the ID here matches up with this ID here. We can see the caption, the date, the image URL, and the location. So let's see if we can see this post in our app now. So I'll jump back to the app and jump back to the home page. And yeah, we can see that new post here. Pretty cool. Although we do have an issue here. We can't see our date on this post like we can on our other posts. And if we jump back to the database, that's because our date is being stored as a string here instead of as an integer like it should be. So we can't see the date that we just created on this post. And that's because it's being stored as a string instead of an integer. So let's first of all just delete this document. And let's jump back to our backend. And to force this to be an integer, we can just call the parseInt method on this to convert that to an integer. So let's save that. And we'll try it again. So I'll jump to the camera page and take a new photo, even though we won't actually see this photo yet in the database. And I'll just call this Firebase post, add the location, click on post image, and it says done parsing forms. Let's have a look at the database now. We have a new post. This time the date is an integer because it has no quotes around it. And let's see if it displays okay in the app. So I'll jump back to the app and jump back to the home page. And yeah, we can now see the date on this new post. So as well as storing our fields as a post in the database, we also want to upload our image to Firebase storage here, where we've already uploaded an image manually. So let's just jump to the Firebase docs site and go to cloud storage and then admin and get started. So we have a little example here, and we're already firing this admin.initialize app method in our backend. We can see that here. So it looks like all we need to do is add this storage bucket property and pass in the address to our bucket. And the bucket is basically just this place where we store our files. And then we get access to that bucket by just calling admin.storage.bucket like this. So I'll just copy this storage bucket property and add that to our initialize app method here. Paste that in there. And then I'll copy this line where we initialize the bucket. And I'll just paste that here after our db variable. I'll change the var to let. So now we just need our bucket URL. And if we jump to our storage page on our project, we can see that URL here. And unfortunately, they make it quite difficult to copy it from here. However, it's also in our address bar. If we go towards the end of our address bar, we can see it here. So I'm going to copy that and just paste it in here. And I'll save that. And now our backend should have access to our bucket. And so we should now be able to upload files to it. Let's upload the image that we're sending to this Create Post request to our Firebase storage bucket. And so with Node.js, we have a temp folder where we can temporarily store files on our server. So in this busboy on file hook, where busboy grabs the file from our incoming request, we're going to save the file to this temp folder. And then later on in the finish hook, we'll upload this file from the temp folder to our storage bucket. And in order to save the file to the temp folder, we need to import 3 Node.js packages. And the first one is the path package, which we can just grab with require path. And this allows us to work with paths in our Node app. Then we need the OS package. And this allows us to get access to the temp folder. And finally, we need the FS package, which allows us to actually write the file to the temp folder. And we don't need to npm install these because these come with Node by default. So let's jump down to our Create Post Endpoint and to the on file hook. And I'm going to get rid of these on data and on end hooks because we're not going to need those. So in this file hook, we first want to set up the path where we're going to store our image temporarily. And this path should be in the /temp folder / and then our unique ID that we're setting up on the camera page .png. So something like this. And we can get access to this temp folder by using the OS package. So we can just trigger os.tempdir to get access to that folder. And we have access to the file name in this file name variable here. So we can combine the tempdir and the file name together using the path package. So we can just do path.join. Then we can just pass in our tempdir and then our file name. And we'll place this file path into a variable. So I'll call that file path. And now our actual file is in this file variable here. And we can grab the data from this file and pipe it into a method in the FS package to write the file to our file path here. So we can just do file.pipe, and then using the FS package, we can just do fs.create write stream, and then pass in the file path where we want to save it to, this file path. So I'll just pass in file path there. And we're also going to need the file path in our finish hook when we actually upload the image. And we're also going to need the MIME type as well. So I'm going to stick these into an object. So I'll create an object up here, and I'll just call it file data. And then at the bottom of our file hook, we'll pass in the file path and the MIME type into this object so we can use it later in the finish hook. So I'll just do file data equals, and then I'll pass in the file path and the MIME type. Okay, so we're now writing the file to the temp folder. So next we need to upload the image from the temp folder to our storage bucket. So we've saved our image to the temp folder here. And now in the finish hook, we want to upload this to our storage bucket. And we have access to our storage bucket with this bucket variable here. And so I'll jump to the finish hook, and we want to upload the image first before we actually write the post to the database, because we need to upload the image and get the path to that image before we can add it to our image URL field here. And to upload a file, we need to call bucket.upload. And this requires 3 parameters. And the first one is the file path to the image that we're going to upload. And we've stored that in this file path variable, which we've stored in this file data object here. So the first parameter will be file data.filepath. And the second parameter is an options object. And this requires a upload type property, which we need to set to media, because we're uploading a media object, an image. And then we need to add a metadata property with another metadata object inside of it. So this is one metadata object for the upload and one metadata object for the file. And then inside this metadata object, we need to add a content type property. And we need to pass our file's MIME type into this. And remember, we're storing this MIME type property in this file data object. So we can get this from file data.MIME type. And next we need to add a download token so that anybody can download and view this image, and not just Google Cloud users. So we pass that in with the Firebase Storage Download Tokens property. And we need to pass a unique ID here. And we can use a package to generate this for us. We can use the UUID package. So I'm going to jump to the terminal and close the server. And I'm going to npm install UUID-v4. Then I'll add --save to save it as a dependency. And then to import that package, we can just do let UUID equals require, and then UUID version 4. And we'll use this to generate a unique ID. And we'll do this near the top of our Create Post Endpoint. So I'll do that here. So we'll store this in a variable called UUID. And then to generate a UUID, we can just fire UUID like that. So let's add this to our download token property here, UUID. And the third parameter on this upload method is a callback, which will be triggered if the upload succeeded or failed. And this will have 2 parameters, an error parameter, which will be null if there's no error, and then an uploaded file parameter. And this will contain some information about the file that was uploaded, including the file name, which we're going to need later on to set this image URL to the correct file name. And so this is going to be a method. And if we don't have an error, then we want to create a document in our Firestore database, like we're doing here. So to check that there's no error, we can just do if not error. And then I'm just going to fire another method, and I'll stick all this code inside that method. So I'll call that create document. And so I'll create that function here and just move this database code into that method. So basically, we'll only write the post to the post collection if the image has been uploaded successfully. And so now we need to update this image URL. And I'll just full screen my code while I do this. And so most parts of this URL will stay the same. So up to this bit, all the way up to this /b bit, all of our image URLs will always start with that. And then we just need to replace the bucket name, which is here, and the file name, which is here. and we need to replace the token, which is here. So let's change these single quotes to backticks so we can interpolate these things. First, let's interpolate the bucket name, and we can get that from the bucket object here by just calling bucket.name. So we'll pass that in, bucket.name, and then we want to replace this file name with the file name of the image we just uploaded. And we can get that file name from this uploaded file object, which is returned after the image is successfully uploaded. And we can get that at uploadedfile.name. So let's stick that in there. So I'll select this file name here and interpolate uploadedfile.name. And then finally, we want to replace this download token with the token that we generated with the UUID library. So that's just stored in this UUID variable. So I'll select all of this token and replace that with UUID. So this should now add the correct path to our new image to the post in the database. And so this writing the post to the database will be our final step in this Create Post Endpoint. So let's add a then block to this set method. And if it's successful, we'll send a response with response.send. And I'll just send a message that says post added. And then I'll just stick the ID of the post in there, which is in fields.id. And then we need to get rid of this other response.send method here. So I'll get rid of that. And I'll save that. And let's see if it's working. So we need to start up our server again with npm start. Jump back to our app. And let's try and create a new post. So take a photo, enter a caption, thumbs up, add my location, and click on post image. And I had to wait quite a while there, and we do have an error returned. And it says here, error empty response. And I think that might be because this set method doesn't actually return anything as a response here. So I'm going to get rid of this response variable and just replace that with 2 parentheses. And I'll save that and clear the terminal, and we'll try that again. And I'll clear the console as well and click on post image. And again, we got an error. So I'm just going to have a look at the terminal here. So reference error, uploaded file is not defined. So let's try and figure out what's going on there. So the uploaded file object is returned after the upload here. And then we're calling this create document function. And I think the issue is that we're trying to use this uploaded file variable, but it doesn't exist within the scope of this function. So we need to pass it to that function where we're calling it here. So I'll just pass in that object here, uploaded file, and save that. And let's try that again. So I'll clear the terminal, clear the console, and click on post image. And again, we got the same error, uploaded file. And that's because I'm not passing the uploaded file variable in here as well in the function declaration. So I'll pass that in there. And hopefully this time it'll work. So I'll save that, clear the terminal, clear the console, and click on post image. So this time we have a response and it says post added with our post ID. Let's have a look in the database. And yeah, here's our new post with the caption thumbs up, and it's added our image URL. So let's see if we can see that post in the app. So let's jump back to the home page. And yeah, we can see our post in the app with the image that we uploaded to Firebase Storage. So our camera page is now basically working. We just need to add some finishing touches, some validation, some error handling, and a loading screen. So our camera page is now basically working, and our Create Post endpoint is working. It's uploading the image and storing the post in the posts collection. Let's just add a little bit of validation to this camera page to prevent errors before the user clicks post image. And I'm not going to add any error messages. Instead, I'm just going to disable some buttons at the appropriate time. So right now, if I click on the capture button to take a photo, that photo is taken, but this button is still clickable. And if we do click it, we have this weird error where the captured image disappears. So let's disable this button once the user has captured an image. So let's jump to the camera page, page-camera.view. And if I scroll up to our data, we have this image captured property, which is set to false initially. But then when we capture an image, this is set to true. And so we can use this property to disable this button. So I'm going to jump to that button, which is here. And to disable a queue button, we can just use the disable prop. And so if this is set to false, then the button won't be disabled. And if it's set to true, then it will be disabled. So we can just pass in this image captured property, because to begin with it will be false, but then when the user captures an image, it will be true. Thus disabling this button if we pass it in here. So I'll pass in image captured and save that, and let's see if that works. So if I capture an image, you can see this button has kind of gone grey and it's now disabled. Can't click it anymore. And right now, even though we've not entered a caption, we can click this post image button. It's not disabled. And I want to only make this button clickable if the user has provided an image and a caption, although I'll make the location optional. And again, we can do that with the disable prop on this post image button. So I'm just going to find that button, and that's here, and I'll add a disable prop to it. And we want to disable this button if there's no caption or if there's no image. And if we look at our data, the caption is in post.caption and the photo is in post.photo. So in this disable prop, we can just do not post.caption or not post.photo. So I'll save that. And you can see this button is now disabled. And hopefully we now need to take a photo and enter a caption in order to enable this button. So if I take a photo, this button is still disabled, but if I enter a caption, you can see this button is now enabled and can be clicked. And just to make it clear that this caption field is a required field, I'm just going to jump to that field and add an asterisk to the label. Save that. And this now looks more like a required field. Let's handle our successes and errors on this page. So if the user creates a post and that's successful, then at that point, there's no point leaving them on the camera page. It'd be better if we could redirect them to the home page so that they can see that new post that they've just added. So I'm going to jump to our Axios call to the Create Post endpoint and to the then block, the success block. And to redirect them to the home page, we can just use the view router. So we can just do this $router.push, and then we can just pass in the path we want to send them to. So we just want to send them to /. And then it'd also be nice if we could show a little notification at the bottom saying new post added or something like that. So we can use Quasar's notify plugin for that. And let me just see if that's already installed in the Quasar conf. We'll just search for plugins. No, we only have the dialog plugin installed so far. So if I jump to the Quasar site, and then if we go to Quasar plugins and then notify, then we can use this to show simple little notifications at the bottom like this. And I'd like to add one with a little dismiss button on it. So if we scroll down to with actions, then we could see notifications with actions. So I want something like this with a little dismiss button. So I'll click on view source on this, go to the script section, and this is that first notification with the dismiss button. So I'm going to copy that. But before we can use this, we need to install it in the config file. So I'll jump to quasar.conf.js and to the plugins option and just pass in notify. So I'll save that and jump back to our success response here, and I'll paste in that example notification. And I'm going to change this message to post created, and I'll get rid of this color property, and I'll get rid of this avatar property as well. And this actions array here, this is where we add buttons to these notifications. And by default, buttons will just dismiss the notification when we click them. So we don't need this handler here. So I'll get rid of this handler parameter, and we'll save that. And let's create a new post, take an image, and I'll put post with redirect in the caption, add the location, and I'll just clear the console and click on post image. And yeah, it took a little while, but it did redirect us to the home page, and we saw the notification, and we could see the new post here, post with redirect. And we will add a loading screen in a little bit so that the user isn't waiting on the camera page while the post and the image are uploaded. But for now, let's just handle any errors on our create post functionality. So I'll jump to the Axios request and to the catch block, which will catch any errors. And instead of just logging out the error, let's show a dialog. We already have a dialog on this page somewhere. I'll just search for dialog, and here it is. So I'll copy that, jump back to our Axios request and the catch block, and we'll paste that in here. And I'll update the message to sorry, could not create post. And just to check that's working, we can just change this URL that we're calling to a URL that doesn't exist. So I'll change this /create post to /create postballs. I'll save that. Let's try and create a post. Call this post with error. Add the location. And click on post image. And yeah, you see an error which says, sorry, could not create post. And before we move on, let's just change this URL back to the correct one with /create post at the end. Save that. And finally, let's just add a loading screen that's displayed when the user clicks on post image. After the user takes a photo and fills in the fields and clicks on post image, they can be left waiting for a while on this page with nothing happening. So it'd be better if we could show a loading screen while they're waiting. And for this location field, we added a little loading icon here for when we're waiting for the location. But in this case, it makes sense to use a loading screen that takes over the whole screen, because we don't want the user to be able to tap on things while that post and that image are being uploaded. So we can use Quasar's loading plugin for this. So I'm going to jump to the Quasar site and go to plugins and loading. And so this will show a loading screen that takes over the entire screen. And this is really simple to use. We first need to add it to our plugins. And then to show a loading screen, we can just fire this $q.loading.show method. And then to hide it, we can just trigger this $q.loading.hide method. So first, I'll add this to our plugins list. So it's just called loading. And then at the top of our add post method, we'll show that loading screen. So we just do that with this $q.loading.show. And then we want to make sure we hide this, whether we have a successful response from the endpoint or if we have an error response. So at the end of the success response, I'll just add this $q.loading.hide, and then I'll copy that and add that to the end of the error response as well. And I'll save that. And let's see if we can see this loading screen. So I'll take a picture, enter a caption, post with loading, add the location, and click on post image. And we see the loading screen. And that doesn't disappear until the post is uploaded and we're redirected to the home page. And so we've now finished all of the front end and all of the back end code for this app. Okay, our app is now complete. So let's deploy this mother to the interwebs. So let's deploy our finished backend to Heroku, and then let's build our front end app for production and deploy it to Firebase hosting. And once we've done that, we'll check that it's working on desktop and on mobile as well. So first, let's deploy our backend. That's pretty simple. So we want to jump to the terminal with the backend running and close the process. And we already have our npm script for deploying to Heroku. So we just need to run npm run deploy. Okay, that's now finished successfully. So let's build our front end app for production. First, we want to make sure our app is using the production API and not the local API. So let's jump to the quasar.conf.js file and down to the build section and switch our variable here to API production and save that. We want to switch to the terminal with our front end running and close the process. And to build our app for production, we can just run quasar build. And that's now finished building. And we now have a new folder in the root of our project, this dist folder. And we have this SPA folder, and this is our production app. So everything is minified and optimized for a production environment. So let's deploy this to Firebase hosting. So I'm just going to jump to the Firebase docs site, firebase.google.com/docs. And then I'm going to scroll down and go to hosting. And then over on the left here, I'm going to go to get started. And it says first we need to install the Firebase CLI. And there's a link to some instructions. And you want to make sure you have npm selected here. So we can just install this with npm with this command, npm install-g Firebase tools. So I'm going to copy that, jump to the terminal and run that command. And I got a permissions error there. So I'm going to try running that again with sudo at the start. Enter my password. And it worked this time. So I'm going to jump back to that get started page. And the next thing we need to do is initialize our project by running Firebase init. So I'm just going to clear the terminal here and run Firebase init. And you might be asked to log into Firebase at this point and enter your password and stuff. But since I'm already logged in, I didn't need to do that. And so we have a bunch of different Firebase features we can set up here. Real-time database, Firestore database, cloud functions, hosting, storage, and emulators. But we're just going to set up hosting. So I'm just going to press spacebar on hosting and hit enter. And it's asking us to associate this project directory with a Firebase project. So we want to choose use an existing project. And then we want to choose our project from the list here. So I'm just going to look for Quasar, and there it is. Hit enter. And now it's asking, what do you want to use as your public directory? Well, the directory we want to use is this dist/spa folder. So I'm just going to put dist. My terminal's gone a bit weird there, but let's see if I can just type in dist/spa. And now it's saying configure as a single page app. And our app is a single page app, but Quasar's handling all of our routing and stuff. So we want to choose no to this. And then it says index HTML already exists, overwrite. You want to choose no to that because that will mess up the project. And we finished initializing our project, so now we want to deploy it. And if we jump back to that get started page, we just need to run Firebase deploy. So let's try that. I'll just clear the terminal and run Firebase deploy. And that's now finished deploying, and it's given us a URL here for our app. So let's copy that and paste it into the browser. And it looks like it's working. You can see all of our posts on the home page. So let's see if the camera page works. And it's asking us for permission. I'll click allow. And yeah, we can see the camera feed in the photo frame. I'll take a photo, add a caption, call this live post. See if location is working. I'll click this button and it's asking us for permission. I'll click on allow. And it's got our location. I pasted it in the location field. Let's see if we can create a post and see it on the home page. And yeah, it's worked. We see the new post on the home page, live post. So finally, let's just see if this is working on a mobile browser. So what you can see here on the screen is my real iOS device, an iPhone XS. So let's see if it's working. I'm going to jump to Safari and then jump to our Firebase hosted app. At this address, hit enter. And the home page looks great. You can see all of our posts. And the layout looks great. So let's see if the camera page is working. It's prompting us for camera permission, so I'm going to click on allow. And it seems to be working. I'll take a photo. And bear in mind that to get the camera feed to work properly on iOS, you will need to add this plays in line attribute to the video element on the camera page. So let's see if we can enter a caption at the office. Let's see if it'll grab our location. Tap on the location button. Click on allow. And yeah, it's grabbed our location. So I'll click on post image. And it successfully created the post. So we've now finished creating this gorgeous Instagram clone, which allows the user to take a photo, get their location, create a post, and then see all of the posts on the homepage. And we've deployed it to the interwebs. But if you want to take this app to the next level and turn it into a progressive web app with all of the 5 core PWA features, home screen installation, pre-caching, caching strategies, background sync, and push notifications, as well as getting it optimized and working on iOS, Android, and all the main desktop browsers, even Internet Explorer, then check out my 15-hour course, Progressive Web Apps with Vue.js, Quasar, and Firebase. Thanks for watching this series, and I'll leave you with the promo video. We're going to incorporate all the main progressive web app features, such as pre-caching and caching, so that our app stores its assets on the user's device. We'll add background sync so that our app works offline, and a user can even create a post offline. We're going to add push notifications, which we can send to our users even if they're not using the app. We're going to make our app installable so that the user can install their app on the home screen with its own icon. Then when we launch it using this icon, we'll see a splash screen and we'll see the app running in full screen with no browser chrome. We'll get the app working on all the main desktop browsers, and it'll even fall back gracefully to older browsers like Internet Explorer. By the end of this course, you'll be able to create your own progressive web apps using Vue.js, Quasar Framework, and Firebase. This course requires a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Please check out the preview videos, and I look forward to seeing you in the course.